Hello. Today we're going to talk about Chapter 2. Chapter 2 focuses mostly on the English colony development. Last chapter we talked mostly about the Spanish and the French with a little bit about the English. But today we're going to talk more about the English colonies and how they get started over here. The English are going to be behind the Spanish and the French in this exploration deal. They were not the most powerful country at the time, that would be Spain. But after the defeat of the Spanish Armada, then Queen Elizabeth I is going to start sending out her sea dogs to see what the English can also find as far as new places to colonize. And so Sir Walter Raleigh is going to be the one who is going to come across. He is going to settle the colony of Roanoke. Roanoke is out on the outer banks of North Carolina. I'm going to show you a graphic of that right here. So here's a map of the Chesapeake area. I'll talk more about that in a minute. But Roanoke is down here. It's in North Carolina. If you've ever been over there, maybe you wanted to see where Kitty Hawk was, where they made the first flight by the Wright brothers. Kitty Hawk is right over here as well. Well, Roanoke sits out here right on the Atlantic Ocean. And so 2 years later, when Sir Walter Raleigh comes back, they're gone. The only thing they could find left was a tree that had Croat written and carved into it. There were no relics, there were no graves, there were no remains of anything left behind. So there's always been a question of what happened to the Roanoke colony, and there's lots of different possibilities. You could have had them attacked by the Native American tribes and wiped out that way, or they could have just been absorbed into the Native American tribes and intermarried and just moved inland. Or being out there right on the edge of the Atlantic, we know how hurricanes are and how devastating they can be. There could have been a Category 4 or 5 hurricane that just swiped them out into sea. So there's a lot of questions about what happened to the Roanoke colony. But that is the first English settlement, although it wasn't successful. The first successful English settlement is going to be Jamestown. Now, as you look at the map, Jamestown is further up this way. So Roanoke's down here. They come in, this is the Chesapeake Bay right here. So these are going to be known as the Chesapeake region. And they're going to come right up here and go further up what is now known as the James River and settle right up in here. So you have Jamestown right here. You have got Colonial Williamsburg that's about right there, and then Yorktown sits right over here. And that's going to, those are names that you're going to remember when we get into the Revolutionary War. This is called the Patriot Triangle through here. And so Jamestown is going to be settled by what is known as a joint stock company. They're going to gain a charter. People are going to, rich people are going to invest in this charter, hoping to get some kind of profit out of the development of this colony over in the New World. I mean, they'd heard about what had happened with Spain and all the gold they had found and how much money the French were making with their fur trade. And so they want to get in on the deal as well. And so a lot of men are going to be coming to the New World, mostly single young men. Some of them are indentured servants. They can't afford to pay their way over, and so they're going to get a rich person to buy their passage, and then they're going to work for them over here until they work off that passage. But you've also got a lot of second and third born sons that are going to come to Jamestown. In Europe, especially in England, they practice something called primogeniture. With primogeniture, the firstborn or the only son gained all the inheritance. If you were a second or third born son, or if you were a girl, you got nothing unless you were fortunate to have a very generous brother, or in the rare cases, the estate was entailed to the female line as well as the male line. So if you've ever seen the movie Pride and Prejudice or read the book by Jane Austen, you have the Bennet family. Mr. Bennet is a gentleman, but his estate is entailed only to the male line, and they have 5 daughters and no sons. And so Mrs. Bennet is totally focused on marrying her daughters well, so they won't be left destitute, because when Mr. Bennet dies, the estate goes to a distant cousin called Mr. Collins, and the girls will get nothing. And so a lot of these second and third born sons, knowing that they have no inheritance coming their way, are going to come over here to the New World to see if they can find their fortune over here. Now, as these second and third born sons came over, the idea of amassing large amounts of land was very desired. The how they figured that somebody was wealthy was by how much land they had more than anything else. And one of the big drawing points about coming over to the New World was something called the head right system. And with the head right system, the person coming over got 50 acres for everyone, for themselves and everyone they brought with them. So if you brought with you brothers or cousins or indentured servants or what have you, every one of those you would get 50 acres for if you were the sponsoring person bringing them over. And that's how families are going to amass large amounts of land. I believe that the Madison family currently, and of course this is the James Madison family, they currently still have like 5,000 acres in Virginia that they've originally got when they first came over. They had much more at one time, and so that's how they acquired all that land. But you're also going to have all these indentured servants come over who are going to work for their master who paid their way over for a number of years as they're trying to work off their debt. A good example of an indentured servant would be Jacob in the Bible. Jacob falls in love with a woman named Rachel, but her father will not let Jacob marry her until he has worked for him for 7 years. At the end of 7 years, they're ready to get married, but Laban has really enjoyed the work that Jacob has been doing. And so in the marriage tent that night, he is going to switch Rachel's sister Leah for Rachel. Well, Jacob still loves Rachel and wants to marry her, so he'll work for another 7 years for the hand of Rachel. So he was an indentured servant for 14 years. Well, a lot of these indentured servants, because of this 7 year thing set up in the Bible, they are going to work for 7 years to work off their debt for the payment of their passage over to the New World. As these men finish and pay off their debt, then they're going to be called freedmen, and they are going to go off and find their own land. And so this is going to cause a lot of conflict with Native American groups that keep getting run off their land by these Englishmen coming in. And so, if you look at the map here, you can see how the incursion keeps getting further and further. The other thing I want you to make note of is look at where they're settling along these lines. They settle along the rivers, because with rivers, not only do you have easy transportation to get from one place to the other, it's a faster way to get your goods to market. It's also a place where you can find fish and fresh water, because as you get further in, you're getting into fresh water and not into salt water. I don't know if you've ever been over on the East Coast, but these rivers are massively huge. They make the Trinity River look like a creek. They are so big. Now, as we spoke about in the last chapter, the Englishmen are going to use the Native Americans to their advantage and persecute them when they can't do so. They learned how to do this when they first colonized Ireland. There is a reason why the Irish historically do not care for the British, because of the way they've been treated throughout the centuries. Well, they're going to apply the same settlement tactics on the Native American population as they applied to the Irish. So they're going to befriend them and use them when they need them, and then they're going to attack them and try to get rid of them when they don't. So if the Native Americans are in the way, the English settlers are just going to move them right over, and so that's going to cause a series of conflicts like we talked about last class. As the Englishmen start moving in, the changes to the land are going to appear. You're going to start having areas fenced off. Now, remember what I told you about Native Americans. They believed that everybody can use the land, but nobody owned it. Well, the Europeans, especially the English, believed that land ownership was the key to everything, and so they're going to start cordoning off what belongs to them. Uh, in the Chesapeake, you're going to have issues also with, because there's so many men, you're going to have also leadership problems. John Smith, like I said last week, is going to step to the forefront. John Rolfe is going to come in and bring a product that they can make money off of because they can't find gold and silver. But with all these men and very few women, you're going to have a lot of conflict that goes on. I mean, think about all the guys together pinned up in the locker room. How long does it take for one kid to, be joking around with another kid, and all kinds of heck breaks loose in the locker room? Well, that's going to be very true with all these settlers, all men stuck in one spot. So it was a good thing when John Rolfe showed up with tobacco, because it got all the settlers busy. They were growing tobacco in the middle of the streets. American tobacco is still the finest tobacco in the world. If you are familiar with someone who uses tobacco products, you may already know this, but other countries around the world covet American tobacco. And so it is going to be a cash crop. It is going to do very well, and they're going to grow it everywhere. As the colony of Maryland gets settled, it also will be a tobacco growing colony. If you look at your map here, you can see that Maryland's right up here. So Maryland and Virginia, later on North Carolina, are all going to be tobacco growing colonies to start with. And because tobacco is a labor intensive crop to grow, they're going to bring in more labor to help grow the tobacco, not just the colonists that come over. So in 1619, you're going to have the coming of the first slaves into North America. When you grow tobacco, it starts off very close together when the plants are first seeded in the ground. As the plants grow, then it gets spaced out, and so it's got several stages that it has to go into, and so they needed more labor, a bigger labor force to be able to adequately grow the tobacco. The women that come to the Chesapeake area are going to be few. The ones that do come are going to marry quickly. You know how it is. It's not safe for a single woman to be in with a whole bunch of men, so she's going to marry quickly. But because of the disease and the climate that exists in that area, you're going to have something known as serial marriages, where a woman will outlive several husbands, or a husband will outlive several wives. The population is not going to grow as fast in the Virginia Chesapeake area because of disease and lack of a more gender balanced type of population. I don't know if you understand the climate in the area, but it is very marshy. The Great Dismal Swamp is right down here on this other side, right as you go into North Carolina. So it's very, very marshy. They didn't understand at the time that mosquitoes carried things like yellow fever and malaria and those types of diseases. And so you're going to have this dying off and this starving time. They had to, advertise to bring more settlers in because the ones that were there kept dying off due to disease and stuff of that nature. Here is a tobacco advertisement from back in the day. And the colonists were trying to, increase their profits. So, of course, advertising has been a big part of what we do to get our products going and stuff like that. I just wanted to show you that. So, in recap, for the Chesapeake area, which is your Virginia and your Maryland colonies, it's going to have a mostly male population. They're going to be coming over here mostly for economic advancement, and they are going to have more struggles with maintaining population levels due to the gender imbalance and the climate that exists there. Now we're going to shift to the New England colonies. The New England colonies come over for a totally different reason than the Chesapeake colonists have come over. the first settlers up in New England over here, and they're going to land over here and then finally move in this way, are going to be the ones that you've always heard about, the ones that we celebrate every Thanksgiving, and that's the Pilgrims. The Pilgrims are separatist. They do not like the way that the Church of England has changed things. They don't think that they have changed things enough, and so they are like their Puritan brothers are going to try and purify the church. They just have a different idea about how that happens. They think that separating from the church is the only way that you're going to be able to purify it. And so originally they're going to leave Plymouth, England, and go over to Holland. But they don't like that their children are starting to intermingle with the Dutch over there in the Dutch Reformed Church, and so that's why they load up on the Mayflower and they come across over to the New World. The reason they land right here along the Cape Cod area is because they've run out of beer. And you probably think that's pretty funny, but back in the day, they stored water in wood barrels. And over time, water and wood, the water gets very rancid. It's rotten. It tastes bad. It's got germs in it. And so they would offset the taste and try to kill off the bacteria by mixing it with alcohol. But they had run out of beer, so they had to stop someplace so they could make some more. They were originally headed down to the Virginia area, but they stop up here in this part of Massachusetts. They run into Native American tribes that are not very nice to them, and that's why they move over here into where Plymouth is now. So the Plymouth colony is by the Pilgrims. They come over in 1620, so about 13 years after the Jamestown colony is set up. About 10 years later, you're going to have the Massachusetts Bay Colony come over, and these also are Puritans, but they're non-separating. What you need to remember about the New England colonies is that they are very, very family-oriented. They're coming over for religious reasons. They come as family groups, and so they come together. They have a common philosophy about life, a common idea about what family structure should be, and so it's going to offer them a sense of stability that the Virginia colony is not going to have. As soon as the Mayflower gets close to land and they're ready to get off the boat, the people of the Mayflower, and that's not just the Pilgrims. You had Pilgrims, you had people that didn't believe at all, you had merchants. So you have all these groups here. That's when they're going to come up with the Mayflower Compact and how they're going to run things once they get onto land. An interesting note about signing of the Mayflower Compact was that men that normally didn't get to sign on documents like that all got to sign this document. So it was a more equality leveling type of document. So the Mayflower Compact was with the Pilgrims. As they settle, they're going to start off with being friends with the Native Americans. Squanto is the Native American chief that is going to set up the first Thanksgiving, teach them how to grow corn, how to survive that first starving winter, so that they can kind of get a foot in there on Plymouth. As the Puritans come over, they're going to be led by a man named John Winthrop. And their idea was that they were going to establish a city on a hill. They were going to be a beacon of light and Christianity to everyone they came in contact with. But it's important to remember that the Puritans, whether it's the Massachusetts Bay Colony or the Pilgrims, they did not come over here to establish religious freedom. They came over here to establish freedom from their persecution, but they're going to turn around and persecute those that don't believe the way they do, just as harshly as they have been persecuted by the Catholics, the Church of England, stuff like that. So they're going to be very rigid religiously. So as more and more people start migrating from England over here. This is going to be called the Great Migration. Now, yes, there are more than one Great Migrations in U.S. history, but this is the earliest one. In total, about 70,000 Englishmen are going to come to the New World, whether it is in New England or it is in the Virginia area. But as more and more come into the New England area, it's going to dictate how they set up their towns and their villages. Because they come over as family groups, you're going to have a much better gender balance in the New England colonies. They're going to live 20 years longer on average than the Virginia colony does, and that's going to allow for them to have what's known as nuclear families. They're going to have not only mom and dad and kids, but they can have cousins, aunts, uncles, grandparents, because they have a more stable lifestyle based off the fact they kind of work together. There's community there that helps each other out. Puritan men are going to be the head of the household, but that doesn't mean that Puritan women did not have some rights. They were allowed for full church membership. They were allowed to divorce, which was unusual in some of the other religious beliefs. But they were also expected to obey their husbands in everything. You're going to find the social structure where you have the man as the head of the household, you have mama as the wife and the childbearer, housekeeper. She does all that stuff, and then the children come after that. During this time, each town was self-governing. You didn't have this large overseer. You had each town had their own thing. And if you look at the period 2 notes that are in on Blackboard, you're going to see that I have put a layout of what a New England town would have looked like. You see, and what's in the center. How so you have the church, you have the town meeting center, and then you have everybody else around the outside of it. And so they were very community oriented. The government, to be able to vote in New England, you had to not only own property and be a white male, you also had to be a church member if you wanted to vote. So to keep in mind, who gets to vote in the New World as far as for the Englishmen, the basics for all of them, but it had to be white, male, and property owner. But then in New England, they added that they also had to be a church member as well. Another aspect of New England life was education. They played a huge emphasis on education. The first university in the New World is going to be Harvard, that's established up in what is now the Boston area. But it was also important for children, not just for adults. Massachusetts is going to pass what's known as the Old Deluder-Satan Act. And that was an education act so that children could get a free public education, because they believed if they taught them how to read, they could read the Bible, and if they could read the Bible, they could stay away from the deluder of Satan. And by providing education to the children, then they would guard themselves against being drug off into hell. Mostly boys were formally educated. Girls were usually educated in the home. Only wealthy boys got to go past the basics of reading, writing, and arithmetic. But it was always a very important aspect of New England society to be well educated. Now, as I said before, the Puritans were not tolerant at all of other religious beliefs besides their own, and even when it came from within. So there are going to be a couple of people that are in the Massachusetts Bay Colony that are going to lock heads with the church leadership. The first one is a man named Roger Williams, and Roger Williams believed that you had to have separation between church and state, that the church should not oversee what the state is doing, and that he believed in a different interpretation of the Bible than what the leadership of the church was saying. And so the Puritans of Massachusetts Bay Colony are going to kick him out and say, get out of here. And so he is going to go to where Rhode Island is now. He is the founder of the Rhode Island colony. Basically, the Baptist denomination is going to come out of the Roger Williams. Later on, a woman named Anne Hutchinson is also going to get sideways with the Massachusetts Bay Colony. She is going to actually say that God directly talked to her. And it's like, oh my goodness, God doesn't talk to women. What are you saying? And so she won't recount what she said, and they're going to kick her out as well. And she too she'll join Roger Williams in Rhode Island and help found that colony there. Later on, there is another woman who leaves. Her name is Mary Dyer, and she goes to the Pennsylvania area, becomes a Quaker. She comes back, tries to convert some of her fellow Puritans to Quakerism, and they are going to execute her for that. So they were really very stuck as far as this is what we're going to do, and no one's going to go against us. And it's going to stay that way for quite some time. Massachusetts, as a state, will not ratify the First Amendment to the Constitution until 1833, when they finally give up their state-run church. Now, also, you need to talk about the economy of the New England area. It's a little different than the economy is going to be in Virginia. If you have looked at your notes for period 2, you're going to find that I have given you some outline on how the colonies, the upper colonies, New England, the middle colonies, Pennsylvania, and the southern colonies, and some background on their geography and some thought questions for you to be able to answer to go along with those. And so it gives you kind of an idea of what some of the economy was up in the New England area. They're going to have fishing, they're going to have shipping, there's lots of lumber up there, so they're going to that's why they have shipping. They don't have a lot of flat land to be able to do a whole lot of agriculture like they do in the Virginia and the Maryland area. So they're going to have orchards, they're going to harvest lumber. They're going to be more of a merchant class up in the New England area than what they are in the southern part of it. The merchant class, because of this, you're going to have a higher wealth per capita. Per capita means every man, woman, child, so you space it all out. So they're going to be a little more wealthy to start off with up in the New England area. Whether we are talking about New England or we're talking about the Chesapeake Bay area, all of these settlers are Englishmen, and they are very, very well versed in the rights of Englishmen, and they want to replicate what they had back in the mother country over here. And so religion and politics and freedom are all going to mix together. They're going to have their moments of peace. They're going to have their moments of infighting, moments of not exactly knowing what to do. I don't know if you've ever been around a church where they're watching their church membership kind of slough off and they don't know how to get it back. That's going to happen up in the New England area, and they're going to come out with the halfway covenant, a way for the children of non-baptized parents can be accepted into the church. In the Virginia area, they're going to be less focused on religion, more focused on the economy, but all of them are going to have an aspect of government that's going to guide what they do. You have, the orders of council that go on up in the New England area. You're going to have the House of Burgesses down in the Virginia area, and all of this is based off of stuff they've had before, like the English Bill of Rights that comes out of the Magna Carta, that nobody is above the law, that you have the right to a trial by jury, that you have the right to freedom of the press. All those things that are going to wind up, 100 years later showing up in our Declaration of Independence and in our Constitution were all things that the Englishmen had brought with them from the mother country and we're trying to replicate over in the New World, even with all of its adjustments and variations on a theme. So that's pretty much chapter 2. Now, I want to go back and hit on a couple of things because at the end of this week, you have a quiz that is going to open up on Blackboard. And I want to go over the process for answering these quiz questions. You have 5 quizzes this semester, and they're all done in fairly, except for the last one, they're all done in the same type of format. So let me go back over here. This is an example of what a quiz looks like. No, this is not the quiz question, but I wanted to kind of give you an example of how you answer one of these questions. Sometimes these types of questions will also show up on your midterm or your final exam. The first part of this question, they always have 3 parts. First part says, briefly explain one example of how religious beliefs determined the character of the 13 colonies between 1607 and 1753. And so I'm going to do 3 things. I am going to identify, I am going to define, and I am going to connect for each one of these. So for this one here, one way that religious beliefs determined the character of the 13 colonies was in New England. So I have identified a section, okay? My next sentence is going to define. The Puritans lived in the area and everything they did was based on their Puritan beliefs. So you had to be a church member to even vote. So I've defined it. Now I'm going to connect it back. This is going to cause the New England area to be very strict religiously and even lead to persecution of those who did not believe. Now I've connected it. And so for every part, you're going to have 2 to 3 complete sentences to answer the quiz. So I don't care if it is a question over the religious beliefs, question over why they came over, question over how they treated the Native Americans, question over how how the 3 European countries differed in settlement. Whichever question you get, whether now or closer to the end of the semester, you're going to answer them in the same format. You're going to identify, you're going to define, and you're going to connect it back to the prompt. So let me give you an example for part B. It says, briefly explain the second example of how religious beliefs determine the character of the 13 colonies. So I would pick a different part of the 13 colonies. Now, this question in reality would come a little bit later after we had talked about the middle colonies, but I would use the Pennsylvania colony. And I would say another way that the religious beliefs determined the character of the 13 colonies was in Pennsylvania. And then I would say the Quakers in Pennsylvania were a colony that based everything off of equality. Their whole colony would have been determined by their belief in buying the land from the Native Americans and treating each other with perfect equality and with being pacifist. And so I would tie that back in. And then for the third piece, for C, an example where religious beliefs had little effect, I would have probably used the Virginia area where they were more focused on economics instead of on religion. And so for each one of these, A, B, and C, then I would have had the 3 parts to it. So each one would have had 2 to 3 sentences to be able to accurately and completely answer the question for that. So as you're looking at your note outlines, whether it's for period 1 or period 2, and you see places where I have given you space to be able to write answers, it is good for you to go back and do those. Am I going to grade these notes? No. When I was taking history in college, there was a study guide that went with the book. I did every single bit of it. I don't care. I mean, all the definitions, all of the matching, all of the practice questions, I did all of it because it helped me understand the rest of it. Did my professor even take it up, much less take a grade for it? Nope. But I had the highest grade in the class. I think I had one test where I made a 97, and one I made a 99, and the other one I made a 100. But it was because I had done the stuff that he didn't even grade. So go back and answer the questions and fill in the boxes. Now I haven't yet. I don't think that I've gotten to a box yet on the period 2 notes yet that you need to fill in. But on the period 1 notes, go back in there and look at the questions that are related to everything. Go back and fill in this information about the different Native American tribes, about the different explorers, and make sure you have all that filled in so that it makes it easy to study for the test. You have a more complete picture of what is going on in the time period. So when the test gets here, no matter what the question is, you've got an understanding of what it's going to be about and how to best answer the questions. Because we don't have a test until the midterm. And so it's going to be important for you to be able to get a grasp of the bigger picture as well as the smaller pieces that go in the middle of it. Next class, we're going to go more into the development of the 13 colonies and their progress towards becoming stable colonies over here. So until next time, y'all have a great one. Bye.